I would now like to thank Mr. Mark Johnson. You're very welcome, Mark, today, for your attendance at the meeting. The format is that we'll ask you to make a brief opening remarks of 5 or 6 minutes duration, and then we'll have a question and answer session after that with the members. Before we begin, I want to draw the your attention to the situation in relation to privilege. Please note you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of any evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings be given, and you're asked to respect the parliamentary practice that to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or person or entity by name or in such ways to make him, her or it identifiable. Members should be aware that under the sailing rules of the chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such ways to make him or her identifiable. Mark, off you go. The floor is yours.
After that. Thank you, and thank you for asking me to come and present myself and my organisation today. My name's Mark Johnson. I've got a kind of a well-documented history behind me, coming from disadvantage and being caught up in the criminal justice system at a very young age. I am an author of a book called Wasted that's I think I've seen about 20 different languages now, so well documented. I write for The Guardian newspaper, and I'm an Ashoka Fellow. I'm a visiting lecturer at Durham University on the psychology degree, and I'm an ex-offender, obviously, and that's what I've come to talk about. I set up an organisation, probably worked on it about 6 years, for 6 years. It's been registered as a charity in the UK for the last 4. And its underline is, it's called User Voice, and its underline is only offenders can stop reoffending, which gives you kind of a brief on what it's about. My whole focus has been, from entering a period of rehabilitation in 2000 myself, got clean off drugs, and I started a business, an arboricultural business, tree surgery. And in 4 years, I employed over 200 young offenders in the business, and I developed what I would term as a therapeutic work-based environment. And that means not only physically do you work, but actually mentally you engage in kind of behavioural change, a behavioural change programme that starts in the mind, you know, through talking about thoughts and feelings rather than what work you're doing. From there, wrote the book and started to consult with the British government and come up with this idea, what I believe there's a gap in the criminal justice system, and that is to learn from the experiences and insight of the people at the sharp end of the system. And often I've found that there is a gap between the people that make the policy and the people that actually have to live the reality of the system. And my whole sort of objective for the last 6 years is trying to bring that and develop a model that brings that closer together. So the organisation set it up as a charity 4 years ago. In that time, this year we turned over under £1 million. We work from the whole size of the UK, so from Northumberland in the community, which is a 100-mile geographic spread, down to Kent, and all in between. We represent probably 15% of the whole criminal justice system in England, so that's prison, probation, community, and now in youth justice as well. What is it? Well, we use a council model, a democratic process of service user engagement, and that's often it's very ordered. So we go into prison, we use ex-offenders, which often are the best place to help somebody that's currently offending to stop, because it's kind of that walked in your shoes experience, and offending behaviour and stepping out of it is so complex, as we know. Often the most effective kind of intervention around that is this communication that takes place between one that's slightly a couple of steps away than the other. that knows how to navigate his thoughts and feelings, and provide information about what you have to do to stop offending. We piloted it in the Isle of Wight in England, 1,600 prisoners on 3 different sites: Camp Hill, under 12-month sentence prison; Albany, which is average length of stay 8.5-year sex offender prison; and Parkhurst, which is a violent sort of maximum security prison. In 1 year, there was a reduction in prisoner complaints in the sex offender prison. So you've got an old age group, very articulate cohort of people that submit a lot of complaints and clog the system up, cost a lot of money in that time. There was a reduction in prisoner complaints by 37%. In Parkhurst prison, there was a reduction of the use of solitary confinement or segregation from 160 days to 47. And at 30,000 feet, what it suggested that by addressing problems closer to the cause, involving the community, you reduce the need and expense for very punitive measures. And so things were dealt with swiftly by the community. The other thing that I've found in working with this group of people is one of the characteristics that stamp the low levels of resilience that exist within this group. So people who find it very difficult to cope with social situations without being violent or disruptive, etc., etc. And so part of the programme, with the learning of this council model, teaches resilience, and it is an intervention in itself. So the prison governor would see what we do as a cost-cutting tool, and UK has seen some significant cuts in the prison budget, etc. And my challenge is that you can't make the same amount of cuts or remove such a large amount of money without taking a community along with those changes. Otherwise, you would get an increase in disturbances, etc. And I believe that that's why the prison governor finds this tool to be what would you call it? Well, highly valued, let's say. The prison staff would benefit from low levels of disturbance or occasions of assault on members of staff, and actually also a more respectable running community, where everybody in that community, which I'll see prison as a community, is respectful towards each other, and the end user, the prisoner, would get an intervention, would get to play a role around something that's very positive and contributing. And there's a lot of psychology around how if you're doing something positive, you're less likely to go back and do something negative. And so we've moved that out into the community. We're in London, there's 23 local delivery units, so there's 33 boroughs in London. At a huge size. There's 23 local delivery units for probation services. We're in 18 of those boroughs now, in central London. It's being used in all sorts of ways, which I couldn't tell you about in sort of 5 minutes. What I can say is that, as far as evidence, we're working with Cambridge University, which are working on a measure in prison called MPQL, which is Measurement of Prisoner Quality of Life, and it's one that the inspectorate uses whilst in the prison. Now, I know through the Irish system and the conversations that I've had with the prison service that they're looking for a similar kind of measurement within that. And this model has been measured against MPQL in 3 prisons: Aylesbury, public sector run; Rye Hill, which is Maidstone, which is public sector run, and Birmingham, which is private GFRES prison, 1,600 prisoners. And we're going to see the outcome of that pretty soon. So we've had the worst economic climate. User voice has literally started in that environment. We'll turn over £1 million. 80% of my organisation are made up of ex-offenders. And we have had 100% contract retention in those 4 years. So while everything else, a lot of other programmes, interventions, etc., are being cut, the people on the ground that need to have effective programmes that have resonance with the people that they're working with have retained our service. And that's it. Thanks.
Quite interesting. Interesting. Deputy McGrath, you wanted to ask a question?
First of all, I just want to say a special welcome to Mark and a warm welcome, and I really appreciate the fact that you come in to address the committee. And I want to commend the work of your organisation as well, because as you know, there's the Oireachtas Committee on Justice here is very interested in the cause of crime and trying to deal with issues and trying to assist prisoners and come up with new and radical ideas. Just can I ask a few short questions? First of all, Mark, you mentioned there the gap issue. You wanted to bridge the gap. Did you mean between the political system and the prisoner, or did you mean the prison service and the prisoner?
Both.
Or both.
Yeah,
right?
both. Yeah. Because I think the way that we start to look at solving a social problem often is done by the group of people that aren't affected by that problem on a personal level, often. So the sort of, I don't want to be politically incorrect, but I probably will be, the sort of white middle class academic type person often has positions of power over a group of people that don't have a political voice often, or don't feel that they have, and are more predisposed to criminal activity or disadvantage. And what this is a tool to actually try and bridge that gap. I liken it, if we looked, and I wish I had some slides, because I'd show you, I'd do a talk on it, and that's, if we put the criminal justice world in this context is commissioner, somebody who's charged with finding a solution to a social problem, provider, who's charged with providing that solution, and end user. And those three sort of different components make up criminal justice. Well, I believe that I started User Voice based off this concept of saying the commissioner has the same agenda with the end user. Both have an absolute need to find something that's effective into helping somebody enter successful living. But the provider often, who's on a sales pitch or a PR drive to look successful, because the psychology of any business is to protect your own interest before any delivery. There's a dysfunctional environment between commissioner and provider. And so the voice or the insight and experience of that end user comes through the agenda of the provider often. And what I say to commissioners is, show me a robust mechanism that we have in our society that's sunk down into this criminal sort of world that can peel away or provide robust insight into what the real issues are and what people need to stop offending or etc. And often there's a resounding silence around that. And that's where user voice has come into this sort of market.
Just from as a politician and as somebody who's been in prisons, I've been pleasantly surprised the few times I was there with the compassion and the relationship between the prison officer and the prison. And we were on a trip there to Cork prison there recently. There was an energy there and a determination from the staff that I said to myself, my God, this is really good public service going on here. That's my personal reaction. And I watched the body language between the prisoners and as we were walking around, and it wasn't just be conscious of people putting on a show for the sake of putting it, but I felt from what I'd seen and other experiences that you had a group of people who were very compassionate and were really determined to get these guys back on the road. And would that be the case, we say, in England, the UK, or am I just...
I would completely agree with you. I've had that personal experience myself, where you found that you've had to enter criminal justice system to for the first time to meet somebody that's actually shown you a bit of care or compassion. But it's dysfunctional because what the real aim is that we as a society should invest on outcome of when that person leaves prison and becomes a contributor to society. And what you've got is a very positive relationship that's occurring behind four walls. That the problems occur when those doors open and that person enters society or re-enters, then the reference point is that somebody cared for me while I was locked up. And so when I've got no structure and my lifestyle's chaotic, I'm on drugs, etc., out here, I want to go back to this reference point, which I knew I had a healthy relationship. That's pretty dysfunctional, and I don't believe that it's where we really need to go with the successful reintegration of offenders and stopping crime.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I have three short questions. Will I put them together, Chair? I don't want to waste your time and the time that. Just first of all, just very quickly, the first question is, Mark, you mentioned there the walked in your shoes experience from people like yourself and other ex-prisoners trying to influence, we'll say, the current prisoners or young people. My first question is, do they really listen? Will a 17, 18-year-old listen to a 35, 40-year-old ex-prisoner? My next question is in relation to the before I got involved in politics, I worked in a disadvantaged school, and we were involved in a project called Breaking the Cycle. But we used to save 85% of the kids at risk because we put a lot of extra work into them. But there was about 15% that came from chaotic, violent, dysfunction families, and by 13 they were stabbing people, by 16 they were on their way to jail. There was no saviour at all. But in fairness, there was about 85% that you could kind of save with a bit of extra care, attention, bring in all sorts of help and supports within the school. But my question there is that 15%, is there any way you can turn kids who come from crisis dysfunctional families, when they see the mother being battered at 4 or 5 years of age, or cocaine fueled rows or things like that? And the final question is, and do you have any advice on that? And the final question is a thing that comes up in Ireland within the prison system. Are there many prisoners and have you come across from your experience, your life's experience in prison, with an intellectual disability or serious other issues, we'll say mental health issues? And that's it, Chairman. Thank you very much.
So the first one was, if I can remember, sorry, it's the younger age group and how you match people.
Yes.
You know, we've been involved in mentoring. In fact, it was one of the first programmes that I designed for the Prince's Trust in England, where young offenders get mentored by ex-offenders, etc. There is some matching to do. Within that. So my organisation is completely reflective of the community that we aim to serve. So young people actually do young people's work. Not all the time. We have a very healthy mixture, I think, is the point. But we do have young people employed within the organisation, and I think that's the seeing is believing bit. Is often the charities that sort of claim or aim to help this disadvantaged group don't contain any of them. And so when you see some young person that can actually, the other young people can relate to, of experiencing some of the same challenges, but see them employed with the prospect of actually growing into the person that they want to be, that gives hope. And often what I've found is that it's the unspoken word that actually does the most. So you could offer a short-based intervention for a young person, but you could put one ex-offender in that's changed his life, but they relate to, and it would have more effect than any of that intervention. That's what I've experienced. As far as the 85%, 15%, I believe that everybody has the potential to change, and I absolutely stand by that. And it's based on the axis of that everybody's got the potential to change if they've got the capacity to get honest with themselves. Yeah, and often what I've experienced with working with this group, especially the younger age group, is a delusion that isn't challenged. Yeah, that living a life of crime is successful in any way, shape or form. And I believe that a lot of the children, young people that I've encountered that are incarcerated live with this delusion that they spend whole sentences, whether it's community, prison, and the mind goes unchallenged completely. And that's the place that I would start. In my own journey, that's the teachable moment, I call it. That we all have opportunities where it's time and circumstance which we become teachable and open, and we miss it as a criminal justice system. It misses that whole journey. So I'll give you an example. I was in Glasgow with a facial injury surgeon, and she said that the teachable moment for them is in the hospital waiting room after a knife attack or the crime. when somebody's adrenaline has gone and they're actually they can communicate with people and get some sort of form of honesty. And that's the point in which that change process should be taking place. Or the first night in prison. Do you know what I mean? Where you can actually crack the delusion and actually speak to somebody and say, do you want this for the rest of your life?
Oh, yeah. We came across a listener service there run by the Samaritans, and they did actually mention prisoners crying themselves to sleep on their own in their cells, because when the penny dropped, that this was it. Senator Batchik, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that really excellent presentation. I was actually thinking of the listener service in Wheatfield as well, as the Chair spoke, because that is it seems to be operating on similar principles to the peer mentoring that you've been running, and it's very impressive to hear about the councils and the peer mentoring. This was a twin track approach. I just was interested to ask you more about the rolling out in Ireland in Irish prisons, and whether can you say more about whether that's likely to go ahead or when that's going to happen?
Because I'm an Ashoka Fellow, which I'm not sure if anybody's aware of, but I wasn't actually until I was made one, but they're
Together?
An Ashoka.
Oh, yeah.
They're part of Change Nation and that sort of stuff. Yeah, Change Makers, yeah. And I come over to do a keynote, which I thought, and it was in Wheatfield, but basically the criminal justice system was mainly the prison service, the Director General, etc. And I brought over a prison governor to basically talk about his experience as a governor, and there was some resonance. Then I've come back over and I gave a talk at the Trinity College, where I've spoke with probation, senior probation and senior prison service, and we've now submitted a proposal to look at the Mountjoy campus with the 3 different groups of people, young offenders, women and adult male, and also within Dublin. Now, our model is about you roll in, upskill the community, and then roll out. You know, it's not like a static service where we would just exist forever. Now, what kind of exciting part that it presented for me personally is my mission is to say that prison should be joined up with the community. In the UK, that's not been the case because if you get sent to prison in the UK, you can get dispersed anywhere in the country. And so you won't necessarily, one prison won't go back to the community that the prison's based in. But within Ireland, in Dublin specifically, and on that campus, there is a huge capacity to do work on entry into prison. That's when rehabilitation should start. Get to have this peer-led mentoring and support, and then actually work within the community outside as well. And in that process, it's kind of wringing out its full potential. And what does it do? It adds benefit to the prison as a community and makes better services. It makes better services on release. And people more in tune because people are communicating with the horse's mouth, so to speak. But it produces this intervention and this peer-led approach to breaking the cycle of crime. I think peer-led approach is probably the most underestimated intervention that's ever sort of been exposed, and yet it's completely underfunded because it doesn't fit in the confines of how we procure and services. Do you know what I mean? But for me, it's the real answer. There's all sorts of evidence, like you think of the 12-step fellowships of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, worldwide programs on drug and alcohol treatment, that it is completely peer-led and one of the most successful programs on the planet. And kind of that taking some of that approach of people that have shared some experience but actually lived successfully is proven hugely successful. So.
Rolled out on the Mountjoy campus, or at least their plans are to roll it out or to start developing it on the.
We're going to talk.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a meeting after here. We've talked to a few third sector funders who's very positive around the innovative properties that this has got, that it approaches an old problem in a new way, involving the right people. And so I'm committed to, if I can help here, and my organisation can, I'm completely committed to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Zappone, did you want to?
Oh, thank you, Mark, so much for your presentation. Congratulations on your own personal journey and as well as the work that you've established. And it's so clear, both in your presentation and your answers, there's such a strong and inspiring vision underneath the practicalities and the ideas. So I just have two questions. One is in relation to the use of the councils, which seem to be an integral, critical aspect of your work. I'm just wondering what might be one of the biggest a couple of barriers to get those councils really effective in their work, and then how do you push through those? That's my first question.
So we use this term, hard to reach group. And for me, they're easy to reach. The real hard to reach group are the staff and the services that are out there. Because I think that it comes down to a person's personal sense of security. That if you're saying, often the dysfunctional sort of conversation that you'll have is, what? So you can do this better than me, so what am I doing? Do you know what I mean? And that's a lack of understanding about being a professional. But by far, the biggest barrier and the biggest thing that can stagnate the council concept is staff and power holders blocking it. But what I can say in Ireland, which is, I couldn't have imagined this would happen. I had a meeting with the Prisons Officers Association, who are really positive about this. And in the UK, we've had a kind of some contrasting conversations with them, you know, where they've not been supportive of it. But here, the conversation was with the secretary, who said, quote, anything that would reduce staff assaults or disturbances in prison would be supported by us. To make that environment that people work in better would be completely supported by us, and we've got evidence to say that that's what this model does. So.
It strikes me just in that answer, and also thinking about what you're presenting, is that, you know, especially again, that the peer mentoring is so integral as well, that clearly that's based on the assumption of the goodness and the capacity of the offenders, and that in itself is quite countercultural and is probably part of the power of what you're doing. Yeah. But just the second question is, at least in your handouts, you talk about the social return on investment ratio. Would you mind, in terms of the investment, in terms of this kind of work and what the social return is, could you talk to us a little bit about that and what would be the components of that, creating double value for the investment?
The fact is that could be any figure. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know what the sort of the committee think about this, but I've seen some very weird and wonderful figures on social return on investment, and it's all guessing. Do you know what I mean? It's all guessing, and I think that's an economic figure that was done with KPMG. In the UK independently. Yeah, that's what they come up with. But what I can say is that the mechanism that they used, I would challenge whether it's fit for purpose, and that is whether it actually extracts the full social return on investment, because there's areas in change and rehabilitation where we can't measure. So how can you measure the impact of somebody changing their life around, going back to a community, being a son to their mother, being a father to their children, breaking the cycle of the peer-led, very criminal sort of chains of conditioning? How can we measure that? We can't put a figure on it, and it's the same as how we measure recidivism rates and stuff. For me, the mechanisms in which we evaluate programmes, the measures, I would question whether they're actually fit for purpose. Never mind accurate. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of, but that was one independent company coming in, looking at a council that just measured it in prison, that didn't measure the full picture, and so that gives a £1.2. I've actually seen third sector programmes coming out with £9. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, and I work with venture capitalists and social investors, which would probably agree with me. You know what I mean? That a lot of it's completely questionable.
So sorry, just to come back, I mean, to
Yeah.
pick up on the Senator's opponent, because I was interested in that figure too. They're still saying it's double value. It's £2 for every £1 invested, and you're saying that has to be an understatement because they're only looking within the prison at the savings
Completely.
generated.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Well,
And
and
it's
the
taking a
other
very
thing is,
crude
yeah, so 37%. So if you took the sex offender prison, which was Albany, if there's a 37% reduction in complaints, without getting the information from the prison service about putting a cost on what the traditional complaints procedure costs, you have to be underselling that. So they've just measured what they can see. But what the full impact on that cost saving in a prison, you actually can't. But I was with the English minister this week, and that's what I said to him is, what I can offer you is the fact that we've had 100% contract retention with people on the ground that need answers, and they see the effect. And what we're doing is working back on ourselves, because it's innovation. We're working back on ourselves to try and provide the science to it. So one of them is Cambridge University. So, for instance, what is a measurement of somebody's experience that come into contact with the criminal justice service? We don't have one. Prison have MPQL, measurement of prisoner quality of life, and I would raise questions with that as well, that it's underselling it. We're working with the probation service in the UK to look at a community-based measurement, but we're so far away from it, and youth services, we're so far away from that. But I think the MPQL is probably the kind of straightest line measurement that we've got. There's Martin O'Neill from the prison service here is actually doing the course, the MSc at Cambridge, and he's very, very interested in bringing MPQL to Ireland. So.
Okay. Deputy Corcoran.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mark, for coming in here this afternoon and sharing your story with us. It's inspirational, to see where you've come from when you were a young offender to where you are now. And look forward to us learning more from you. And it'll be interesting to get more information from you as your work with Mountjoy deepens, I suppose, and to see what kind of results. So maybe there'll be a mechanism to feed back into us at some stage. That would be great. Just in terms of the way you operate the model. If I'm a young offender in Mountjoy and it's my first night and I've heard all about the fact that you're coming in and I want to engage with you, how does that actually happen? Specifically, how do you make that connection with them? How do they hear about it? What do they actually do if they want to engage with you but they're maybe not good at communicating? How do you get through to them, or what techniques do you use? Do you explore their personalities and what they need through the arts or music, or maybe you could expand a wee bit on that.
The programme, I'm not sure if I provided the detail, the structure of the programme in my notes, but so it starts with an ex-offender entering into the prison. It can start with inspirational storytelling about themselves, and to see if there's resonance with that. Then we use a survey. Now, Arnstein, she developed, it's called the ladder of citizen engagement, and it's about engagement and the value of it. And on the bottom it says informing feedback survey. So it's a very, very sort of tokenistic form of getting insight. It's actually valueless to the person that's actually involved in it, but we use surveys because what it does is it introduces you to people. So we'll cover every single member in a prison through their door, or face to face, and we'll get them to do a questionnaire. That'll give us their contact information and about their willingness to actually want to be interested in doing a little bit more. And then what will happen from there, there's a few different tools and quite colourful as well, depending on age group and location. They'll do focus groups, and then it's kind of like storming and forming concept. So you'll take the 1,000,001 different issues and gripes and complaints that a governor often hears, and you'll work with the group in those focus groups to start to fold their personal gripes and complaints into issue-based. And so the council isn't personality-based, which you can imagine is up for corruption when you've got sort of forceful sort of criminal characters in prison. So it's issue-based, which takes that out of it. And often it's 4 parties that form. So it's sort of the world can fall under 4 areas: housing, resettlement, training and education, drugs and alcohol, and community and environment. So the prison community itself. And every gripe that I've heard, ever, could probably be housed under those headings. And then the process goes to, we teach them campaigning techniques, strategising. We get local politicians into the prisons and into the community to talk about canvassing, how they respond to the public, etc. And then the parties, this sort of steering group, does like a dummy run of a council election. They go out doing the canvassing, etc., telling the public about what they're standing for, etc., and then it'll go to vote. And they'll get proportional representation on the council, which is quite interesting, watching a group of people that have never voted, never had an interest in it, start to emerge and start to strategise. You know, so you'll see one party who's a bit, you know, smart, they'd be the biggest, and that will only run for 1 term because everybody else starts to figure out, hold on a minute, they're going to keep getting all of the proposals put forward if we don't jump in. And so you start to get this dynamics that occur within the prison. It's very, very interesting. And of course, in that process, you're teaching people resilience. You're teaching people how to resolve conflict non-violently, which is sometimes a completely new, fresh approach to a lot of these people. I can give you a lot of anecdotal stuff, you know, how I've watched these very small things, and this is probably a quote that I hear often from a prison governor, is I'm amazed how it's the smallest things have the biggest impact in the prison environment. So one is like a deep clean of a visits hall when somebody's loved one and children are coming, you know, and they clean the deep clean, has a huge impact on the prison environment. Or watch a group of prisoners at Parkhurst win a can opener. Now, that's an absurd instrument, but when you're serving a life sentence and you're allowed to buy tins of fruit on your canteen, but there's nowhere to open it, you know, and you're, for the foreseeable future, serving a life, that will cause a lot of frustration. And then to the really big ones, it was actually Parkhurst again, that the council was instrumental in voting in and doing the groundwork on the community of voting in vulnerable prisoners with mainstream prisoners. Now, if you can imagine the cohort in Parkhurst, violent armed robbers type people to very high level sex offending, and the council was instrumental in voting that community in. That's another thing that we can't put a cost on, but it's got a massive one, because in one wing it's like running 2 separate prisons that are now integrated, that can cut the number of staff time that has to manage that. And that was through the community saying, hold on a minute, we were respectful towards each other. Do you know what I mean? And that was brought in. So it's I couldn't say in an hour the sophistication that this model's got, but I can provide you with any information that you require from it. And as you can imagine, in 4 or 5 years in this environment, trying to get this group of people into prison, never mind to, you know, to produce outcomes, it's been pretty difficult, but it's well thought out.
Okay. Anybody else with questions? Yeah, just prisoners that are addicted to substances. That's a whole other area. How do you deal with that?
Well, no matter what situation you're in, you can be used to benefit the services that are provided. So whether you're a drug addict who doesn't comply with an order and uses street drugs rather than gets on a methadone prescription, you can provide insight into making a better service that could potentially help you, whether you're cured or not, you know, whether you can get off it or not. And then there's the opportunity. I mean, I'm a recovering drug addict, so I've been clean 13 years. I used heroin at 11, and that's well documented. But what happens is when people have come through, got onto a programme of change, like drug rehabilitation programme, for me, they're the best measure of successfully rehabilitated offenders, because if you remove the drug addiction and the alcohol, all of the criminogenic factors go with it. Do you know what I mean? And some of my staff, not all, I would measure, I can manage, and through my experience of being an employer, and I've employed hundreds, if they're clean, they're okay. And then when you start to see the behaviour change, you start to know, actually I can offer help or remove them from their high-risk job. i.e. in prison, going into prison if somebody's relapsed, not very good. But
prisoners that you can't work with, that won't cooperate, that just can't be reached out to?
On a personal level, no. Because as I said before, the whole concept is based on that I believe that everybody can change if they've got the capacity to get honest with themselves. But politically, we're not working with sex offenders. And it's a political and systemic sort of issue rather than a real one or a lack of willingness. We do work in sex offender prisons, and actually a large proportion of the English system contains sex offenders that you wouldn't even know they are anyway. But actually, outside in the community, there are a lot more there's a lot more sort of risk aversion sort of to that.
You mentioned the pounds and the pence earlier on, and the actual tangible savings to the prison governors, and that they were interested initially in that. Could you say a bit more about that aspect of the actual saving in the prison budget?
Well, there's a whole lack of access to getting information which could prove that model. I wouldn't say the sort of being uncooperative. I would just say that the issue in the UK is very, very complex, and to go to one place to get, okay, what would this cost? And to then, as a third sector organisation, get the money to do a whole piece of research on the economic environment that it would save a prison. Is that a third sector fundable piece of work? I believe that it's probably a public service piece of work that should be done, or at least a co-produced piece of work, but completely willing. And for me, that's with all of my work. When I had my arboricultural business, it was successful, and I based that on financial. And I think everything should be based on financial. I believe that you can do more for less. Do you know what I mean? And actually create more relevant interventions for people if they're allowed to get involved themselves. But we have this bar that stops them. The way that we create service, you have to go and do a 3-year degree to become a social worker or probation officer. And then you get put in control of somebody that's had 20 years of absolutely microscopic insight into living in that lifestyle, and one person's in power over another. For me, it's a bit wrong. And there's no opportunity for that person to feed their insight and experiences back in.
Except what you're doing.
Yeah.
Any other points or questions from members? Okay, Mark, well, thank you very much for coming here today. Very, very interesting. We'll follow the progress carefully, and we might actually invite you back again at a later stage to review how you're getting on. And I think we're fascinated with this. It's we've come across a number of organisations here in our work on penal reform that are doing other work in a similar way. There's Call Market in Wexford, which we're very impressed with, and they use motivational interviewing technique, which is very powerful. And also we've come across ASIO here in Dublin, and of course, as you say yourself, the probation service, the prison service here are very progressive, I think, and we've engaged with them as well in the Prison Officers Association. We found them to be, I think, when they came in here to us, very progressive and very forward-thinking. So hopefully everyone can work together for the better of it. I also want to recognise the fact that there are some members of the public gallery here today with us, Daniel Hutch from User Voice, and Erin Forma of Ashoka, and Rose Leamy from Ashoka, and Andy Brennan from the Irish Prison Service, Brian Dack from the Irish Probation Service, Alison Boner from the Irish Probation Service, and Kevin Granat, a student, and also Sive O'Connor and her mum and her aunt as well, also here, a student today. So you're all very welcome, and thanks for being here. So thank you very much, Mark. And the Joint Committee is now adjourned until Wednesday, 13th of March, 2013. Thank you, members.